Imagine stepping onto a windswept plain where the horizon is a thin line of stone-black sky, and before you rise a circle of monoliths so ancient they seem to breathe the very breath of the earth. Göbekli Tepe, hidden for millennia beneath the dust of Anatolia, is not merely a temple. It is a whisper from humanity's first heartbeat. What message lies beneath those silent stones, and why did our ancestors carve such colossal, animal-crowned pillars in a world that had yet to know agriculture? The site was unearthed in the 1990s by a modest Turkish archaeologist, and what emerged was a complex of 11 stone circles, each ring anchored by pillars up to 18 feet tall, their surfaces etched with the snarling faces of lions, foxes, and serpents. These carvings are not decorative, they are deliberate, each line cut with a precision that suggests a shared language of symbols, a visual code that predates written script by at least 3,000 years. Some researchers argue the motifs represent constellations, mapping the night sky onto stone, while others see them as mythic guardians protecting a place of ritual power. Beneath the stone, a layer of dark, organic material has been found, rich, carbon-laden soil that hints at repeated fires, feasting, and possibly sacrificial rites. Radiocarbon dates push the earliest constructions to around 9,600 BCE, making Göbekli Tepe older than Stonehenge, the Egyptian pyramids, and even the advent of settled farming. Yet, the most unsettling fact remains. After centuries of use, the site was deliberately buried, its very foundations backfilled with earth, as if the builders wanted it hidden from all future eyes. Why would a civilization, capable of moving massive limestone blocks, choose to entomb its own sacred heart? Some scholars suggest a cataclysmic environmental shift, perhaps a sudden flood or drought, forced a ritual burial, a symbolic death of the old world. Others propose a social transformation. The rise of agriculture might have rendered the hunter-gatherer rituals obsolete, and the stones were sealed to erase a fading belief system. Still, no written record explains the act, leaving us with only the stone's mute testimony. When you stand among those pillars, the air seems to thrum with an echo of forgotten chants, the shadows cast by the pillars' towering silhouettes forming a labyrinth of darkness. The silence is oppressive, as if the stones themselves are holding their breath, waiting for someone to decipher the language they bear. What if the carvings are a map, not of geography, but of consciousness, a guide to a worldview lost to time? Or perhaps the message is simpler, a warning etched in stone, that the forces which raised Göbekli Tepe could also bring it low. The enigma remains unbroken. Each new excavation uncovers another layer of mystery, and each hypothesis only deepens the darkness surrounding this prehistoric cathedral. Until we can read the stone's silent script, Göbekli Tepe will continue to loom over the Anatolian plain, a monument to a forgotten age that still asks the same question. What were our ancestors trying to tell us, and what lies waiting, buried beneath the silent stones? Imagine standing on the frozen edge of the Siberian taiga in late January, the wind howling like a chorus of lost souls, and looking out over a lake that glows an unsettling, deep crimson even as the world around it shivers solid. This is Krasnoyarsk's Blood Red Lake, a pocket of liquid that refuses to obey the laws of winter. How does a body of water, hemmed in by permafrost and bitter sub-zero temperatures, maintain a liquid, scarlet surface that never freezes, no matter how long the polar night drags on? The first recorded mention of the lake comes from a 19th-century Russian explorer's journal, who described the water as the color of fresh blood, trembling under a sky of iron. Since then, scientists, locals, and curious travelers have tried to peel back the layers of mystery. Some suggest the lake's hue is the result of iron-rich mineral deposits leaching from the surrounding basalt cliffs. When iron oxidizes, it can tint water a rust red, especially when the water is highly acidic. Others point to the presence of a unique algae Chlorococcum krasnoyarskii which thrives in cold, low-light environments and produces a reddish pigment known as phycoerythrin. This organism, they argue, could keep the water from forming a solid crust by constantly circulating and releasing heat through photosynthetic activity. But the most perplexing element remains the lake's stubborn resistance to freezing. In a region where the air temperature routinely plummets to -40 degrees Celsius, the surface stays liquid, sometimes even shimmering with a faint, otherworldly glow. One hypothesis posits a hidden geothermal vent beneath the lakebed, pumping warm water upward. Infrared surveys have detected subtle temperature anomalies, hinting at a slow, steady flow of heat that keeps the upper layers just above the freezing point. Yet no drilling has ever confirmed a vent, and the lake's depth, over 30 meters in places, makes direct measurement treacherous. Local folklore adds another layer of dread. The Evenki people speak of a blood spirit that guards the lake, a guardian that will drown any who attempt to disturb its surface. Some claim that on moonless nights, the water emits a low, mournful hum, as if the lake itself were breathing. Tourists who have dared to set foot on its icy rim report a strange, metallic taste on their lips and an unsettling feeling of being watched. Scientists continue to monitor the lake with remote sensors, measuring salinity, pH, and temperature in hopes of finding a pattern. So far, data shows the water's salinity is higher than typical freshwater lakes, which lowers the freezing point, but not enough to explain a complete lack of ice. The mystery deepens with each new piece of evidence, leaving us with more questions than answers. Is the lake sustained by an unseen geothermal heartbeat, a thriving colony of cold-adapted algae, or something far older and more inexplicable, perhaps a relic of a forgotten epoch when Earth's climate was wildly different? As the night grows darker, and the wind carries the faint scent of pine and iron, the blood-red lake remains a silent, shimmering enigma, daring anyone who gazes upon it to confront the unknown. Its surface reflects not only the cold sky above, but also the lingering chill of humanity's own unanswered curiosities. And somewhere beneath that crimson veil, a secret still waits, patient and unmoved, for the day when we finally uncover the truth, or perhaps, for the day when the lake decides to keep its story forever locked in blood-colored silence. Deep in the craggy heart of the Andes, where the thin air bites like cold steel and the mountains loom like ancient sentinels, a stone doorway has lain sealed for centuries. Locals whisper that it guards the body of the White Lady, a figure cloaked in mystery. Her legend woven from colonial chronicles, indigenous oral tradition, and a handful of faded sketches that hint at a woman dressed in luminous, unblemished cloth. Who was she, and why does her tomb remain untouched? The story begins in 1885, when a French explorer named Henry Duval trekked the high plateau of the Puno region, guided by a shaman who claimed his ancestors remembered a woman of otherworldly beauty who once ruled over a forgotten valley. Duval's journal describes a narrow fissure in the rock, its entrance concealed by a slab of quartz that reflected the sunrise in a blinding glare, hence the name, White Lady. Inside, the air was unnaturally still, scented with the faint aroma of wild orchid and something metallic, as if centuries of decay had been halted. Archaeologists who later surveyed the site noted several puzzling details. The stone lintel bore a glyph resembling a serpent entwined with a sun disk, a motif common to the Tiwanaku culture, yet the surrounding architecture incorporated masonry techniques reminiscent of Inca stonework, precise, interlocking blocks with no mortar. No human remains have been recovered. Instead, a solitary silver necklace lay atop a basalt altar, its beads polished to a mirror finish, catching any stray light like a frozen heartbeat. Some scholars propose that the White Lady was a high priestess, perhaps a queen-like figure who mediated between the sun god and her people. Her garments dyed with a rare mineral that gave them an ethereal white hue. Others suggest a tragic love story. A Spanish noblewoman who fell in love with an Andean chieftain, forced to flee the colonial courts, and ultimately sealed herself away to escape persecution. The lack of any Spanish artifacts, no crucifix, no rosary, leans against that theory, yet the very name White Lady echoes the colonial term La Dama Blanca, used to describe women who vanished under mysterious circumstances. A more unsettling hypothesis comes from a handful of ethnographers who recorded a local belief that the tomb is a portal. According to them, the quartz slab acts as a lens, focusing the sun's rays onto a hidden chamber that, when illuminated, awakens a dormant force, a protective spirit, or perhaps something far older. They claim that on solstices, a low hum can be heard emanating from the rocks, like a distant chant reverberating through stone. Despite modern attempts to pry the slab open, using explosives, hydraulic lifts, even laser cutting, the doorway remains stubbornly sealed. Each time the stone resists, a thin layer of white dust settles over the tools, as if the mountain itself exhales a warning. The mystery deepens. Is the tomb a natural formation, an elaborate tomb, or a deliberately crafted barrier meant to keep something inside, or perhaps keep the world out? To this day, the White Lady watches over the Andes, her visage forever frozen in the minds of those who hear the wind howl through the high passes. The unanswered questions linger like the thin clouds that cling to the peaks. Who was she, truly? A priestess, a queen, a lover, or a guardian of a secret too dangerous for mortal eyes? The stone door stays shut, and the answer remains as elusive as the sunrise that never quite reaches the hidden chamber. What if a single sheet of metal, hammered into copper and buried for 2,000 years, held the map to a treasure that never saw the light of day? The Copper Scroll, discovered in the remote caves of Qumran in 1952, is unlike any other of the Dead Sea Scrolls. While the other manuscripts were fragile parchment or brittle papyrus, this one was a thick, rust-stained roll of copper, inscribed with a bewildering series of numbers, place names, and cryptic instructions. Scholars who have examined it describe the text as a kind of ancient accounting ledger. The hidden treasure of the 64 thousands of silver and gold shekels, the 12,000 talents of gold, the 20,000 silver, the 500 shekels of brass, followed by a long list of locations, caverns, pits, and valleys, each paired with precise measurements. The language is a form of biblical Hebrew, but the syntax is so terse that even seasoned epigraphers struggle to parse its meaning. The first mystery is why the scroll was forged from copper at all. Some suggest the authors wanted a durable medium that would survive the harsh desert climate, a kind of ancient bank statement that could be carried safely through wars and raids. Others argue it was a deliberate deception, a hoax intended to mislead rivals about the location of a secret hoard belonging to the Qumran sect, the Essenes. Even more perplexing is the treasure itself. The quantities described would amount to a fortune rivaling the wealth of ancient kingdoms. Yet no archaeological expedition has uncovered any of the listed caches. Teams have scoured the vicinity of the caves, the deserts of Judea, and even the depths of the Dead Sea, following the coordinates etched in the copper, only to find barren rock or natural formations that could not possibly conceal such riches. Some researchers propose that the treasure was not material at all, but a symbolic cache of sacred objects, perhaps the temple's treasury hidden before the Roman siege of 70 CE. Others point to the possibility that the locations reference places that no longer exist, erased by centuries of seismic activity and shifting sands, rendering the map effectively obsolete. One intriguing theory suggests the scroll is a coded inventory of stolen temple vessels, hidden by a clandestine group that fled Jerusalem. If true, the copper roll would be a rare glimpse into the desperate measures taken to preserve holy relics in the face of annihilation. Yet without a single confirmed find, the Copper Scroll remains an enigma wrapped in metal, its numbers echoing across the desert like a whisper from a lost civilization. So the question lingers. Does the Copper Scroll conceal a tangible hoard waiting to be uncovered, or is it a sophisticated riddle, a testament to a people desperate to protect their legacy? Until the sand shifts again and a hidden chamber is revealed, the copper's cold surface will continue to guard its secrets, leaving us to wonder what riches, or what stories, remain forever buried beneath the dunes. The wind that sweeps over the salty dunes of North Carolina carries more than just the scent of the ocean. It whispers of a mystery that has haunted historians for 4 centuries. In 1587, a group of 115 English settlers set foot on Roanoke Island, their hearts full of hope and their cargoes brimming with tools, seeds, and the promise of a new world. They built a fort, planted crops, and waited for supplies from Sir Walter Raleigh's fleet. Yet when Sir John White finally returned in 1590, the settlement was empty, its doors ajar, its hearths cold, and the only clue left behind was a single carved word etched into a post: Croatoan. What did that single syllable mean? Were the colonists forced to flee, abducted, or did they simply disappear into the surrounding wilderness? For decades, scholars have chased every lead, from the nearby Croatoan Island, now known as Hatteras, to the dense inland forests where native tribes roamed. Most theories crumble under the weight of missing evidence, until last autumn, when a team of archaeologists from the University of Virginia uncovered a shallow pit near the original fort site. Inside lay a fragment of pottery, unmistakably English, bearing a faint imprint of a crest that matches the Raleigh Company's seal. Beside it, half buried, was a rusted iron clasp that appears to have once held a leather strap, perhaps part of a sailor's belt. What makes this find chilling is not the artifact itself, but the subtle pattern of soil discoloration surrounding it. ground-penetrating radar revealed a series of linear depressions extending from the pit toward the marshes, almost as if a concealed pathway had been deliberately carved. Some researchers suggest this could be a forgotten trail used by the colonists to escape inland, guided by the very word Croatoan. Others argue it might be a natural formation misread by hopeful eyes. The real intrigue deepens when the pottery shard is examined under a microscope. Embedded in the glaze are microscopic plant fibers that, when identified, belong to a species of pine found only on the distant mainland, not on the island. This raises a provocative question. Did the settlers travel far beyond the immediate coastline, perhaps seeking refuge with distant tribes, or were they compelled to journey inland under duress? No definitive answer emerges, but the evidence adds a new layer to an already tangled tapestry. The lost colony continues to loom over the Atlantic, a silent reminder that history can be as fragile as the sand beneath our feet. As night falls over Roanoke's ghostly shoreline, the wind still carries that single word, Croatoan, echoing across the water, urging us to wonder what fate truly befell those 115 souls, and whether the answer lies buried just beneath the earth, waiting for the next curious hand to uncover it. Deep beneath the relentless glare of the Sahara's endless dunes, a silent enigma waits for the night watcher's eye. Scattered across the arid expanse, half buried in sand that has shifted for millennia, lie dozens of circular stone formations that locals call beehives. From a distance, they resemble the crude nests of insects, their low, squat walls composed of roughly hewn limestone blocks stacked in concentric rings. Yet their regularity and precision hint at a purpose far beyond simple shelter. When the first explorers stumbled upon these structures in the early 20th century, they recorded the uncanny alignment of several circles with the cardinal points. The inner chambers, some merely a meter across, open onto narrow passageways that converge on a central pit. In the darkness of night, the pit catches the faintest glimmer of starlight, and the walls, etched with shallow incisions, act as a rudimentary lens, amplifying the faintest points of light. Some researchers, such as the French archaeologist Jean-Claude Dupont, have argued that these incisions correspond to the positions of prominent constellations, especially those that dominate the desert sky during the summer solstice. The theory gains weight when we consider the region's ancient inhabitants, the Garamantes, who thrived in the Sahara's hidden oasis network between 500 BC and 500 AD. Their mastery of groundwater and sophisticated irrigation suggests a culture capable of complex engineering. Yet no written record from the Garamantes mentions the circles, leaving scholars to piece together intention from stone alone. One hypothesis suggests that the beehives served as seasonal observatories, where priests or astronomer priests gathered to track the movement of the Milky Way, marking the passage of years and timing the crucial planting cycles of their date palms. Adding to the mystery, several of the circles contain small stone slabs bearing petroglyphs of spirals and zigzags, motifs that appear in other Saharan rock art associated with ritual dance. Could the structures have doubled as ceremonial chambers, where celestial observations were woven into mythic storytelling? Or were they practical tools, their geometry calibrated to signal the exact moment when the sun rose directly over a distant dune, casting a fleeting shadow that illuminated a hidden niche, perhaps a repository for grain or a sacred relic? Even modern satellite imagery cannot fully resolve the purpose of these formations. Infrared scans reveal subtle temperature differentials within the pits, hinting that they may have functioned as passive coolers, preserving perishable goods beneath the scorching desert heat. Yet the most unsettling clue lies in the silence of the surrounding dunes. No contemporary settlements, no trade routes, just the endless sea of sand and these stone circles, standing like sentinels of a forgotten sky watch. As the wind howls through the empty corridors and the stars wheel overhead, we are left with a question that lingers like the desert's own heat. Were these humble beehives merely shelters, or did they whisper to the heavens, guiding a civilization that vanished long before our records could capture their story? The answer remains buried beneath layers of sand and time, waiting for the next curious soul to step into the darkness and listen. What if the very stones beneath the Mexican desert were whispering a secret that predates the Aztecs, a message encoded in the precise geometry of a lone pyramid that never fit into any known calendar? Deep in the heart of the Teotihuacan Plateau, half buried beneath sand and time, rises the so-called Pyramid of the Sun. At first glance, it looks like any other monumental mound, a silent sentinel watching over the Avenue of the Dead. Yet when scholars first measured its orientation in the 1970s, they discovered something that sent shivers through the archaeological community. The pyramid does not align with the solstices, nor with the equinoxes that dominate Mesoamerican architecture. Instead, its main axis points almost exactly toward the rising point of the star Alkaid, the far hand tip of the Great Bear, on a night that occurs once every 500 years. The anomaly deepened when a team of archaeo-astronomers, using high-resolution LiDAR, traced a faint, straight line of stone markers extending from the pyramid's base toward a distant, unexcavated hill. Along that line, they found a series of petroglyphs depicting a sun disk surrounded by a constellation that matches the current position of Alkaid, but drawn in a style unlike any known pre-classic culture. Some researchers propose that this alignment was a celestial clock, a beacon for a lost civilization that understood the sky in a way far more precise than any of its successors. Others argue it could be a later addition, a post-classic ritual path meant to honor a foreign tribe that briefly settled the region after Teotihuacan's collapse. The mystery tightens when radiocarbon dating of charcoal, found in a shallow trench near the alignment, returned an age of roughly 800 years, centuries before Teotihuacan's rise. If the dating holds, the stone line and its sun-star orientation belong to a people whose name has been erased from all surviving records. No pottery, no glyphs, no oral tradition mentions them, yet their engineering prowess is evident in the flawless cut of the basalt blocks and the uncanny precision of the astronomical sightline. Could this be the lingering echo of a forgotten empire, a civilization that vanished without a trace, leaving only a solitary pyramid pointing to a distant star? Or is it an elaborate hoax, a later misinterpretation of a natural geological fault that merely resembles an astronomical alignment? The desert keeps its secrets close, the wind erasing footprints while the stones remain steadfast, still oriented toward an unknown horizon. As night falls over the plateau and the first faint glimmer of Alkaid pierces the darkness, one cannot help but wonder what eyes once watched that same point in the sky, and what story they were trying to tell us, if only we could decipher the silent language of the stones. The night is a deep, velvety shroud over the barren expanse of the Nazca Desert, and yet the earth beneath it is never truly still. Imagine a horizon where the sand stretches like a silent ocean, and above it a sky so clear you can see every star as if they were pinned to a black canvas. In the darkness, the ancient lines, giant geoglyphs of hummingbirds, monkeys, spirals, and colossal human figures, are invisible, erased by the night's shadows. Then, before dawn, a subtle transformation begins, as if the desert itself exhales and reveals a hidden script written by hands that vanished millennia ago. How do these massive designs, some stretching over 500 meters, appear seemingly overnight? Scientists have long argued that the Nazca people scraped away the dark, iron oxide-rich surface layer of the desert floor, exposing the lighter, siliceous soil underneath. The desert's climate, however, adds a cruel twist to the mystery. In the humid season, thin layers of mineral-rich crust form each year, gradually coating the lines with a fine, reddish patina. When the dry season arrives, the relentless wind and the desert's extreme diurnal temperature shifts cause the surface to crack and flake, peeling back that thin coating in places where the underlying soil is less compact. The process is so delicate that a single night of cooling can cause microscopic fractures to propagate, revealing a fresh swath of bright earth that catches the first rays of sunrise. But there is another, more unsettling layer to the story. Local lore speaks of the whispering winds, a term given by the descendants of the Nazca, who claim that on certain nights the air carries a faint, humming resonance, as if the ground itself is speaking. Some researchers have recorded low-frequency vibrations in the desert's crust during these wind events, suggesting that the sand's movement can act like a giant, natural sandblaster, eroding the dark crust in focused bands. The wind, funneled through the canyon walls, can reach speeds of over 70 kilometers per hour, creating a subtle polishing effect along the grooves that were originally carved. Over years, these wind-polished corridors become starkly visible against the surrounding terrain. Even more puzzling is the timing. Satellite imagery shows that the lines can be traced in full clarity within a few weeks after the first clear sunrise of the season, yet older photographs taken just a month earlier sometimes show them faint or partially obscured. The rapidity of the change has led some archaeologists to propose a cyclical desert varnish phenomenon, an organic layer of bacteria, and lichens that darken the surface during humid months, only to be stripped away by the desert's relentless aridity. When the varnish peels, it does so along the precise edges of the ancient cuts, as if the ground remembers where it was once exposed. So, each dawn, when the sun climbs over the dunes, the Nazca lines emerge like ghostly silhouettes, stretching across the plain in perfect, unbroken form. Whether the result of meticulous ancient engineering, a relentless natural polishing by the wind, or a mysterious interaction between mineral crusts and desert microbes, the lines appear with a quiet inevitability that feels almost supernatural. As we watch the first light bleed into the geoglyphs, the question lingers: are we witnessing a masterpiece preserved by human hands, or are we merely spectators to a desert that, night after night, writes its own secret code across the sands? The answer, like the lines themselves, fades with the shifting wind, leaving us to listen to the whispering desert and wonder what other truths lie buried beneath its silent dunes. The wind that sweeps through the desert at night carries with it the faint scent of incense, a reminder that the Magao caves have been a sanctuary for monks and pilgrims for over 1,000 years. Yet, buried deep within the ochre-stained walls of Cave 16, there lies a series of frescoes that have baffled scholars since their discovery in the early 20th century. At first glance, they appear to be ordinary Buddhist iconography, celestial beings, lotus blossoms, and the endless procession of bodhisattvas. But look closer, and a stranger pattern emerges. A cluster of figures whose bodies are elongated, their heads crowned with what looks like metallic helmets, their eyes rendered as glowing orbs. Some of these entities are shown hovering above a stylized landscape that bears no resemblance to any known Chinese topography. Instead, jagged peaks rise like teeth, and a luminous disk hovers low over a river that seems to flow upside down. One theory, proposed by a handful of art historians, suggests that these images are the product of a syncretic exchange between Silk Road travelers and local monks, a visual metaphor for the meeting of the heavens and the earth. Yet another, more controversial hypothesis whispers that the artists may have been attempting to record an encounter with something beyond human comprehension, perhaps a sky-borne craft that glided over the dunes, its hull shimmering with iridescent paint. The frescoes do not depict conventional dragons or mythic beasts. Their proportions, the absence of scales, and the precise, almost technical rendering of the craft hint at an observation rather than imagination. What deepens the mystery is the timing. The paintings are dated to the early 9th century, a period when the Tang dynasty was flourishing, but no written record from that era mentions strange visitors from the heavens. The only textual clue comes from a marginal note left by a monk centuries later, written in a hurried script. The sky opened, and luminous beings descended, bearing gifts of fire. Whether this is a literal account, a poetic allegory, or a later addition remains unknown. Scientists who have examined the pigments find a composition that includes minerals not typical of the region, suggesting that the artists may have sourced exotic materials, perhaps traded along the same routes that carried silk and spices. Could the very paint itself be a relic of a forgotten exchange, a physical testament to a moment when humanity stared up and saw something truly alien? The Magao caves have survived wars, earthquakes, and the ravages of time, yet these enigmatic panels continue to stare back, their silent narrative frozen in mineral and pigment. As the candlelight flickers against the ancient stone, one cannot help but wonder: did the monks capture a fleeting glimpse of an unrecorded encounter, or are we merely projecting our modern fascination onto symbols that were once meant to convey a different, perhaps equally mysterious, truth? The answer, like the desert night, remains hidden in the shadows. What if the massive, feathered beasts that once ruled the skies were not just the stuff of legend, but real creatures whose bones lie buried beneath our feet? For centuries, the indigenous peoples of North America whispered of thunderbirds, gigantic birds that could summon storms with a single beat of their wings. Their stories were dismissed as myth until a handful of bewildering fossil discoveries began to surface, forcing paleontologists to question the limits of avian evolution. The first clue emerged in the early 1900s, when a massive, bird-like femur was unearthed in the Badlands of South Dakota. The bone measured nearly 2 feet in length, far exceeding any known raptor of the Pleistocene. Its hollow, pneumatic structure, a hallmark of true birds, was unmistakable, yet its sheer size suggested a predator that could rival the wingspan of a small airplane. When the specimen was compared to the giant flightless terror birds of South America, the differences were stark. The badlands femur belonged to a creature capable of flight, not a grounded hunter. Decades later, in the remote valleys of the Rocky Mountains, a set of colossal wing bones was found embedded in limestone deposits dating back roughly 12,000 years. The humerus and ulna, each over a foot long, bore the elegant curvature of soaring birds, but their robustness hinted at a muscular powerhouse able to generate lift in a way no modern bird could. Some researchers propose that these remains belong to Territornis, the infamous giant condor that prowled the skies of the late Pleistocene. Yet the dimensions of the new fossils exceed even the largest known Territornis specimens by a considerable margin. Adding to the intrigue, a series of fossilized feather impressions were recovered from the Green River Formation in Wyoming. The feathers are unusually broad, with a lattice of fine barbules that would have produced an immense wing surface area. When examined under scanning electron microscopes, the microstructure reveals a resilience to tearing far beyond that of any extant raptor, suggesting an evolutionary adaptation for withstanding the high-velocity air currents generated during powerful, storm-inducing wing beats. The scientific community remains divided. One school of thought argues that these bones represent a previously unknown giant bird, a missing species that occupied the apex of the aerial food chain before the end Pleistocene megafaunal collapse. Their size, combined with the mythic thunderbird narratives, could indicate a real, living memory passed down through oral tradition. Another perspective cautions against sensationalism, pointing out that fragmented fossils can be misidentified, and that cultural stories often amplify natural phenomena, like massive eagles or condors, into larger-than-life legends. Regardless of the interpretation, the evidence forces us to confront a haunting possibility: that the thunderbirds of ancient lore were not purely symbolic, but rooted in encounters with an enormous, feathered predator capable of shaping weather itself. As we sift through the strata of time, the unanswered questions linger: what caused their extinction, and could a creature of such magnitude ever have truly existed? The silence of the fossil record answers only in whispers, leaving us to wonder whether the thunder still rolls over the plains, echoing the forgotten wings of a vanished giant. The forest at the base of Mount Fuji has long been whispered about as a place where the very earth seems to swallow secrets whole. Aokigahara, the Sea of Trees, is a silent, moss-laden labyrinth that stretches for 24 square kilometers, its floor blanketed with ancient cedar roots that twist like skeletal hands. Travelers who venture in report an unsettling stillness. The wind is muffled, the birds absent, and even the light seems to dim beneath the canopy. Yet the most chilling mystery of this dark forest is not its reputation as a site of sorrow, but the strange phenomenon that has plagued investigators for decades: bodies that disappear beneath the pine needles only to reappear days, sometimes weeks, later on distant roads, in streams, or even in the very huts where the forest meets the world outside. When the first documented case surfaced in the early 1970s, local police found a small, weather-worn journal near a fresh grave. The entry described a night of heavy rain, a sudden feeling of being watched, and an inexplicable urge to leave the forest's interior. By morning, the body was gone, the shallow grave untouched. Weeks later, the same corpse was recovered on a highway 24 kilometers away, its clothes soaked, but its hands still clenched around a rusted charm shaped like a fox. Since then, dozens of similar reports have emerged, each more baffling than the last. Scientists have offered several theories, each falling short of a complete explanation. One suggests the forest's unique limestone substratum creates hidden sinkholes that can temporarily trap bodies, only for the ground to shift and release them later when the soil saturates. Another posits that the dense network of underground streams, known locally as kawara, could carry remains far from their original burial sites, depositing them in unexpected locations when the water recedes. Yet neither hypothesis accounts for the precise timing. Bodies often surface on the exact anniversary of the person's disappearance, as if some unseen clock were ticking beneath the roots. Local folklore adds a darker layer. The Aokigahara legend speaks of yurei, restless spirits of those who died by their own hands, bound to the forest until they are released by an act of compassion. Some elders claim that the forest itself, remembers the souls it has taken, returning them to the living world in a twisted form of redemption. In a remote village, an elderly monk once told a reporter, "The trees hold the dead like a prayer. When the wind blows just right, the prayer is spoken aloud, and the body finds its way back to the world of the living." What makes the phenomenon truly unnerving is the consistency of the details. In each case, the recovered bodies bear the same signs of recent exposure: fresh footprints surrounding the grave, a lingering scent of pine resin, and, disturbingly, a small, hand-carved wooden talisman placed in the victim's pocket, identical to those found in centuries-old burial sites across the forest. Some researchers have even documented a faint, phosphorescent glow emanating from the talismans, a glow that fades once the body is moved. The dark forest of Aokigahara remains a place where the line between the natural and the supernatural blurs. Whether the answer lies in geology, hydrology, or something far more elusive, the forest continues to return its secrets, one cold, reappearing body at a time, leaving investigators standing among the twisted trunks, wondering what unseen force decides when a soul can finally leave the shadows. What if the silence that swallowed 9 hikers in the Ural wilderness was not a tragedy at all, but a warning echoing across the frozen night? The Dyatlov Pass incident has haunted investigators for decades, its cold-blooded details, torn tents, inexplicable injuries, and footprints leading into a blizzard that never returned, still defying conventional explanation. Yet, in the frost-kissed archives of a remote Russian university, a fresh hypothesis has emerged, one that turns the entire tragedy into a chilling encounter with a natural phenomenon so rare that science barely acknowledges its existence. The theory, proposed by geophysicist Dr. Elena Morozova, centers on a phenomenon known as a ballistic aurora, a sudden, localized burst of electromagnetic energy that can occur during intense geomagnetic storms. Unlike the shimmering curtains of the familiar aurora borealis, a ballistic aurora releases a focused pulse of charged particles that interact violently with the ionosphere, producing a bright, blinding flash followed by a rapid, high-frequency pressure wave. In the remote valleys of the northern Urals, where the magnetic field lines converge, such an event could be triggered by a solar coronal mass ejection combined with the region's unique topography. According to Morozova's calculations, on the night of February 2, 1959, a moderate solar flare struck Earth, and the ensuing geomagnetic disturbance was amplified by the surrounding peaks of the Kalat-Siek range. The resulting pressure wave, traveling at supersonic speed, would have slammed into the hikers' makeshift camp without a sound, an invisible force capable of ripping canvas and disorienting the human body. Witnesses later reported that the tent's canvas was torn from the inside, as if an unseen hand had torn it outward. The victims' clothing bore strange burn marks, consistent with a brief but intense exposure to electromagnetic radiation, a detail that has long puzzled forensic analysts. What makes this theory especially unsettling is its implication for the injuries recorded on the bodies. Autopsies revealed severe internal trauma, broken ribs, pulmonary edema, and hemorrhaging, yet no external wounds could account for such damage. A high-frequency pressure wave can cause exactly those injuries. The rapid compression and decompression of air in the lungs leads to internal ruptures, while the sudden acceleration can shatter bones without leaving external cuts. Moreover, the victims' bodies were found scattered in a half-kilometer radius, each lying in a state of panic, as if they had fled from an invisible terror. The ballistic aurora hypothesis explains the frantic flight. The intense flash would have temporarily blinded the hikers, while the pressure wave left them with an acute sense of disorientation and a primal urge to escape the source. Skeptics argue that no recorded ballistic aurora has ever produced such lethal effects, and that the phenomenon remains largely theoretical. Yet Morozova points to a handful of modern incidents, pilot reports of sudden, bright flashes followed by pressure-like sensations at high altitude that hint at its existence. She also highlights a 1972 Soviet experiment in which a controlled electromagnetic pulse was detonated on a mountain plateau, resulting in exactly the type of canvas tearing and internal injuries observed at Dyatlov. The mystery, then, does not rest in the cold hands of a murderer or a secret military test, but in the raw, unforgiving power of the planet itself. A power that can turn the night sky into a weapon, leaving behind only an endless echo of unanswered questions. As the wind continues to howl over the desolate pass, one can only wonder. If the mountains can whisper death through the aurora, what other silent forces lie waiting, hidden in the world's most remote corners, ready to strike when humanity looks up and forgets the true darkness that resides above? What if the fragments we have uncovered, shimmering stone circles that defy astronomy, bronze tablets etched with indecipherable scripts, a forest that swallows sound, are not isolated curiosities, but pieces of a larger puzzle that humanity has been unable to solve for millennia? Imagine a world where every mystery we have ever whispered about is a thread woven into a single, unseen tapestry. The stone heads of the Saqqara necropolis, their eyes gazing eternally toward a horizon no longer recognizable, hint at a knowledge of the stars that predates our recorded calendars. The copper puma artifact, recovered from a Peruvian burial mound, bears a pattern of concentric spirals that match the magnetic anomalies recorded beneath the Nazca Desert, suggesting an ancient awareness of the planet's hidden forces. In the depths of the Siberian permafrost, a perfectly preserved woolly mammoth lay beside a slab of limestone, bearing a series of symbols that mirror the glyphs found on the enigmatic Voynich manuscript. Symbols that have never been matched to any known language. Even the blood-red lake of Krasnoye, where the water remains inexplicably warm and emits a low hum at twilight, aligns with the location of a forgotten Bronze Age settlement whose walls are constructed from a material that refuses to decay, despite exposure to the harshest elements. Each of these anomalies, each forgotten relic, appears to have been deliberately placed, as if a silent hand arranged them across continents and epochs. Some scholars propose that a lost civilization, far older than Sumer or the Indus Valley, possessed a unified understanding of energy, time, and consciousness, knowledge that was deliberately erased, perhaps because it threatened the emerging powers of the ages. Others argue that we are simply witnessing the random scattering of human curiosity, that the patterns we see are the mind's attempt to impose order on chaos. Yet the coincidences are too striking to ignore. The same geometric ratios appear on the walls of a Mayan temple, on a Neolithic stone circle in the British Isles, and in the intricate latticework of a 9th-century Japanese pagoda. As we stand before these silent sentinels, the question lingers like a cold breath in a dark cavern. Are these forgotten secrets guardians of a greater truth, a truth that once illuminated the world, but was buried by the sands of time, war, and forgetfulness? Perhaps the answer lies not in solving any single mystery, but in listening to the chorus they form. A low, resonant hum that calls us to look beyond our fragmented histories and consider that the world itself may be a single, unfathomable enigma waiting to be acknowledged. The final question remains, hanging in the stale air of our curiosity. What would happen if the veil finally lifted and we finally understood the purpose behind these ancient whispers? The answer, like the shadows that cling to the edges of the night, is still out there, waiting for a mind brave enough to seek it.